This is Jill at Jillily Studio again. This is day 2 of our sew along for the Christmas Blizzard quilt. And we're going to start sewing our pieces together today. Yesterday we cut them all, so they're all ready to go, and I'll teach you how to put them together. This quilt is put together in rows, but the rows go up and down, so I guess you could call them columns. So your quilt row diagram has how the quilt is going to go together by rows, and the rows are going across on the diagram. But if you were to take this and tip it, this would be how I've got this quilt hung. That's the center of the quilt. So you're going to put them together in the rows, working from left to right, and I'll show you how that's done. I've laid out some of the pieces from row 1 on my design wall, and you want to put them in a pleasing arrangement so that you have a variety of your prints and that their same print aren't touching each other. And then I've just used my Quilt Blizzard row diagram as I've laid out each section. And these are put in sections so that we have a long diagonal line between each section. Can you see that? Now this section has a diagonal that goes this way. It doesn't matter if your diagonal is going this way or this way, as long as you can sew a seam between all of these pieces. Now if you were to sew together just these two and then sew this piece on and this piece on, then you'd have to do an inset seam to get these other pieces in here. And so that's why I have it divided up by sections that have a long seam in between them. Okay, I'm ready to sew. I'll start on the left side, take my pieces, and I've got them at my sewing machine, and I'm going to put those right sides together just how I had them laid out. And you can see how I can match up those little notches that I took off the ends, and then sew right down with a 1/4 inch seam. I'm going to grab the next set. Now you can lay these out and have your diagram right there in front of you and do them as you grab a piece as you go, however it works best for you. This is the top 2 pieces, and then the bottom piece goes right there. So be careful not to put it on the wrong place so that you end up with an inset seam. So you want to always have a diagonal long line that goes all the way across your row. So that's going there. When I'm working at the machine, I just finger press those pieces that are going to be sewn together in units, and then when I get all of them done, I'll go to the ironing board and press them. I'm going to press these. I like to set my seam first, so I press it first while it's flat, and then open it up and press that open. Now, on this quilt, I don't worry too much about which direction my seams are going, and that is because it's really impossible to get it right. And as I was sewing the rows together, if I had trouble, I just would flip one of the seams one way, and it worked just fine. So this one has 2. We've already finger pressed this one seam, so I'm going to finish pressing it. And then this seam, the other seam goes this way. Sometimes when you have 2 pieces that have this, where they join the white, it might be hard to get that to match. I did unpick this once, and honestly, I just adjusted, my seam allowance was a teeny tiny bit too skinny, and it made a big difference. So I don't know that I'd worry too much about those. There are places on the quilt where some of these seams don't match exactly. Can you see those? That one's not great. This one's pretty good. But it doesn't really matter. These are all really good. So I wouldn't fuss too much about that. You want it to be as close as possible, but there you go. So there's our diagram, and we've got, this is the first thing. And then the next section has this. So that's the start of row 1. And now I'll put those pieces together. You can see how easy it'll be to seam those right together. Now, I'm not going to worry too much about whether that seam matches, but it probably will if I use my little clipped points to make that match. So let's start sewing this row together. So what you're going to match up is that clipped little point with the side edge of this so that they match perfectly, and that puts those 2 diagonal pieces together. I found that this was such a fun quilt to do. It was like doing a puzzle. I had such a good time putting it together. I couldn't wait to see each row come together. You see, now this one I'm going to match those up, but this edge goes up there, and that one right there. We have the start of row 1. The snowflake is started. Give it a bit of steam. Wow, look at that. So that'll be right there. This is the next piece that goes together. Wow, I think you're going to have a great time putting this together. Let me show you one little thing. Looking at this row diagram, can you see that most of our seams are little diagonals going up from the bottom of the row? But right here we have 2 units that are separated in the center. So that means to sew these 2 pieces together and these 2 together before you join that together to create a unit. This happens once in a while throughout here's another one like that has the units separated, and you need to do the pieces in each unit, subunit together first, and then join those pieces together. So when you've pieced all of your rows across from left to right, then you will sew your rows together. But as you're joining them together, you'll notice that you're going to have a zigzag edge out here. See that? So don't be worried about that. Just match this piece up with the piece below it, and it will have extra fabric sticking out on the side. We'll trim that off in day 3. All right, I'm working on row 3 just so that I can show you that when we talked about dividing some of the units horizontally rather than vertically. And so on row 3, you'll notice this is the first unit, and the second unit is one that is divided horizontally. So I've got the pieces in the upper section sewn together, pieces in the lower section are sewn together. Then I will join these 2 and join them to the rest of the row as I go. But these pieces have to be sewn together first before I can stick these 2 together now and sew that seam. And then I'll press this open. Now I have a full unit that has the diagonal sides on it, but I had to put it together in separate subunits first. So that you can see how we join the rows together, just imagine that I have the row already done. I've got the first section of rows 1, 2, and 3 done. I'm going to take rows 1 and 2, put them right sides together, and go to my sewing machine. And you can see that these little hexy units are going to match up with each other kind of magically as we sew them together. So and when I get to a seam, if I've got seams flipped the wrong way, I'll just flip them by hand. This one's good, and it will work out in the end. It'll be fine. Now I'm going to add the 3rd row. Just match these up here. Let's press these rows, and you can press them any way you want. I've already pressed the seam between 1 and 2, and now I'm going to press this seam between 2 and 3, and I'm going to press it down, but it doesn't really matter which way you press. When you have extra bulk at your seams, that's all going to be lost into your batting when we get it quilted. So that's rows 1, 2, and 3. On the actual quilt, that's down here at the bottom. Okay, so that's row 1, 2, and 3 put together. And go ahead and sew all your pieces in each row, and then sew the rows together, and tomorrow we'll be ready to trim.